Welcome to the Creating High Performance Athletes podcast. I'm your host, Olympian Jonathan Edwards. Let's get started. Greetings, everyone. It is Wednesday. We are talking about how to strategize for your athletic future. Really excited for surprise. So for some of my athletes, the season just ended or is about to end. And so this is a good time to talk about it. For some of you, the season's not even close to ending, so hang tight. Greg Lapham, good to see you. Michelle Neiman, good to see you. Mom's on. Hey, Mom. Kim Croto, how's it going? Really excited about today's topic. So like I said, a lot of my winter sport athletes are kind of winding up their season, which seems weird. I also have some athletes now that are stuck in this whole coronavirus stuff, and seasons are ending. Like swimmers, for instance, Connecticut today was the first state to just kind of just ban everything. Brianna, hey, good to see you. So Connecticut ended swimming, which is really bugging me. So I'm worried that for some of our sports, like New York State just banned all parents from stands at hockey games. So Jason Gavon, good to see you. Loved your post of that hockey dad brawling with the ref. That was kind of fun. Was that your team, Jason, by the way? So got a lot of people coming in here on the live. So if you're listening to me on iTunes, I really hope you'll share this with friends of yours, friends, parents, and coaches, because I want to share something today that really kind of they say when we look back on our past that we forget kind of half of how things went. Half of things went, but I was thinking today about my luge experience where I was training for the Olympics and how our seasons ended, and some of the goal setting we did. And now, kind of much later on in life, doing the work I do as kind of a mental conditioning coach, a mental performance coach with athletes in a variety of sports, I realized how bad it was what we did, right? And how it could have been so much better. So I really wanted to talk about that today, but let me just talk real quick because it's on everybody's mind, the coronavirus stuff. I'm old enough to have seen this happen now over a couple different things. Sports is obviously different in terms of contact because, for some of our athletes, they come in contact with a lot of other athletes. Obviously in contact sports, it's pretty obvious, but I've got luge athletes on here and skiers, and I've got speed skaters and athletes who never touch another human being, and all these cancellations are really going to hurt the athletes, and that's really disappointing for me as a coach, and I know for the athletes too. It's almost no different than like a boycott. When a team gets boycotted. Politically, like it just doesn't make a lot of sense. Hey there, Jorge, good to see you. I'm just hopeful that this kind of rides out. What I'm really worried about is that for all our athletes that are in high school sports that are finishing up the seasons, that things start getting canceled, and then we go through the summer and the coronavirus thing is still a thing, and then what happens in the fall? Like, when do we start? I feel come fall, everybody's going to be homeschooling anyway. So it's going to be one of those things. So, all right. So on to the topic. A couple things. If this is the first time you've ever heard me, I'm Jonathan Edwards. I run a website called athletespecific.com. I am a mental performance coach, a mental conditioning coach. I've wrote a book called An Athlete's Guide to Winning in Sports and Life, which is on Amazon. And I love what I do. I get to work with parents and aspiring athletes every day, and it's just awesome, right? So super exciting for me because I think, like most coaches, I look back on what I did as an athlete, and for those of you that know my story, I consider myself somewhat unlikely Olympian, but a lot of good things came out of it, and now. With a huge interest in sports psych and mental performance, this is what I do every day. And so I just love it. So we've got this podcast on iTunes. There's going to be more YouTube stuff coming up. And I really want to work with your athletes someday. Let's just put it right out there. So if I can help you, don't be afraid to reach out. So today's topic is how to strategize for your athletic future. Okay. I'll start with a story. So when I was on the U.S. national team going for the Olympics, at the end of every season, what I remember of our goal setting was it went something like this. It was like, okay, you finished 6th overall in the world. what are we going to do to get you to fourth overall in the world? Like, I think your goal next year should be fourth overall in the world. And at the time, that seemed like a good idea. But one thing that I realize is that that's the worst type of goal setting you can have, because you have no control over the outcome of your competitors, right? Even someone in a sport like wrestling or boxing, right? You're going to be number one. You're going to be number one. You can set that as kind of that's an outcome goal. But what really has to happen is a really hard look inside as to what you need to do according to your abilities, right? So at athletespecific.com, if you go to athletespecific.com/3 keys, I have a webinar there that's like on constantly. You just can subscribe to it, watch the video with your athlete. But it'll give you just kind of an update, like an upgrade into like how to think about your athlete's abilities. Okay. Because what needs to happen is that any sort of external goal setting, and it doesn't matter how old your kid is, by the way. Your kid can be 6 years old and you're doing all this goal setting, or your kid can be 6 years old and they're doing more of it, obviously. But I think as a team, as a parent, as an athlete, as a coach, sometimes the coaches are not very good at this, but you have to have this game plan to strategize, right, to get to the next level. Because what's going to happen is that your athlete will get stuck in some of those abilities, and I'm gonna tell you that in a moment. Okay, so let me start with kind of the worst case scenario, which is quitting. Okay, I did a blog post on this a while back called "How to Know When to Quit," and so excuse me. One of the things that if your athlete is thinking about quitting, my recommendation is is to not make the decision right away, to not make that decision in a position of anger or upset, to let the grieving process of however the season has gone kind of play out. Now, sometimes you are told to quit or you're cut, and then you're making a big rethink on to strategize to how to get back, right? And so that's something that you have to think of as well, and we'll cover that. But the first thing I wanted to cover was if your athlete's thinking about quitting, they had a rough season, rough go, whatever, to give some time for it to play out. It's very rare, and if you're a sports fan, you see this happen a lot in sports where an athlete quits, they retire right away, and then they don't really have anything to replace that, and they're not really done athletically, and then they stick with it athletically. So what I want, if you are in that space or your athlete's in that space, is to give it some time, right? To really be able to think clearly. The only problem with some of my athletes that are involved where they travel a lot, luge, skiing, speed skating, any sort of World Cup athlete where they're traveling in Europe, usually what happens is when they're back traveling is that they're happy and they're going about their day, and it's a phenomenal lifestyle and it's enjoyable and it makes it seem all worthwhile again. When they are away from that can create a little bit of angst, right? So a little bit of tension, because when they're home and they're not in Europe and they're not eating Milka bars and eating McDonald's on the road and driving the Autobahn, things like that, it's hard to get some clear headspace there to make a really good decision. All right, so that's why I recommend giving some time. But when it comes to strategizing, the first thing you have to look at is your athlete's abilities. So I write about that in my book, in An Athlete's Guide to Winning in Sports and Life. But let me just give you the background here. So every athlete has 3 key abilities: physical, technical, and tactical, right? So physical ability, technical ability, tactical ability. I'm not going to get into all the detail here right now, but those are the 3 biggies, okay? What happens a lot is athletes usually fall in love with training one of those abilities. And usually it's technical. It can sometimes be physical, but a lot of times it's technical. It's the doing of the thing of their sport, okay? So for luge athletes, it's luging. For or sliding. For lacrosse players, it's being on the field throwing the ball. For my goalies, it's taking shots. For my skiers, it's being on snow. They don't feel like they're working unless they're doing those things. So what happens is they tend to get almost lost in the doing of those things. Because what happens is when you're in that situation and you're doing the thing, that's what you love the most. That's what athletes love the most, right? Skaters love to skate, pistol shooters love to shoot pistols, archers love to shoot bows and arrows, kayakers like to kayak, rowers like to row. You name it, it's the doing of the thing. And a lot of athletes get so mired in the doing of the thing that they forget about their physical ability. They think that their physical ability is going to improve just by doing the technical work involved in their sport. And this gets clouded often by your coach, who is typically your technical coach, right? Usually the coach you see most of the time is your technical coach. Now in the off season, you would have a physical coach, like a strength and conditioning coach or something along those lines. But for the most part, your main coach, your main interaction with your program is your technical coach. Now, for some of my athletes that are involved in team sports, your coach is not technical, but they are tactical. They are the ones. This happens for my figure skaters as well, right? Their main coach is the one who says, "I need you to do this, run here, turn there. I need you to make this play happen." Or like I said, for my figure skaters, it's choreography is a big one, right? The coach goes, "All right, we need to be able to do this jump here. We're going to pick this music." Those are all tactical decisions. But the one ability that makes the biggest bang for the buck in any sport is your athlete's physical ability, okay? So many times what happens in sport is that you take two athletes with equal technical ability, the one with better physical ability will win, okay? Now let me give you some examples. So when I competed in the sport of luge a long time ago, we had a lot of interaction with bobsledders. And there was back in I'm going to age myself a little bit here, but back leading up to the 92 Olympic Games in Albertville, France, bobsled did something that they had never done before. So they went out and they recruited professional football players, right? And track athletes. So at the time in bobsled, there was career bobsled guys. These guys were athletes. They trained to be bobsledders. They learned to push. But what happened was the program said, like, okay, let's go. Who else could push a bobsled? And it was pretty obvious that track athletes and football players were pretty good at pushing stuff. So they ended up getting Herschel Walker, Willie Gault, and Edwin Moses. You'll have to Google those names. Herschel Walker was the only guy that stuck, and he was a great teammate. But I share that story as a way to just kind of articulate that a bigger, better, badder athlete who can do what you do technically is going to supplant you no matter what the sport, okay? Figure skating coaches look at gymnasts and think, my God, if I can make that kid skate, they would be phenomenal. Every year after the Olympic Games, when there's the 100-meter dash, they would say like, oh, a soccer team goes, oh, if we could take Usain Bolt and turn them into a soccer player, he would run past everybody and we would win, right? We would win the Premier League, right? So this goes across every sport. And so what happens, though, in every sport is that there's a certain way that people train. There's a certain way that things are done. And what happens is this creates like what I call athlete incest, okay? Athletic incest. And I got this term from a book called Getting Everything You Can Out of All You've Got by a guy named Jay Abraham. It's a business book. But he talks about in the world of business that a lot of businesses will look at other businesses just like them and try to replicate what they're doing, but just do more of it. Right? And to work harder, to outwork each other. And that's not sustainable. And then what ends up happening is nobody really improves, right? Everybody kind of makes these incremental improvements. But when people look outside and they come back and they go, all right, I need to be a better athlete in my sport. Who is a great athlete and what do they do to become a great athlete? Again, depending on the sport, you would find different answers to that, right? And this all goes down to your athlete's three key abilities. Like if they are weak, if they're undersized, if they're overweight, if they got a little extra chubs where they're not, a little muffin top where they don't need the muffin top, right? Boys and girls, by the way. Right? Athletes can fall in love with so much with the technical stuff that they go, oh, I need to be doing the technical stuff or else I'm not going to do very well. When in fact, if they took their energy and they put it more on the physical side, they would come back to the season and do incredibly well. And so physical ability is one that's really easy to improve, right? I was a strength and conditioning coach. I still am, but I ran had athletes in a small facility that I trained for years. I still do strength and conditioning programs for athletes. And really, it's the easiest way to kind of give Mother Nature a kick in the butt. And that's true if your athletes is U8, U10, or if they're high school age and above, right? Then there's no question, okay? So what I want you to understand is that you got to look really hard at the three key abilities. Now, what I do kind of in my role now as a mental conditioning, mental performance coach is I look at what I call the three layers. And again, these are outlined in my book if you want to check them out. But the first layer, so people talk a lot about athletes like, okay, they have physical, technical, tactical abilities, like they're pillars, like on a stool. And then there was this fourth pillar, which was mental. And like, if you removed them, it's like the stool would fall over. And I don't believe that. So the way I view this is that if you have an athlete and literally I look at every athlete like little bar graphs, like for those of you, if you ever played a video game where, you're picking teams or players and they have different bar graphs of like what they have, strength, speed, power, like all that stuff. I look at athletes like that, especially like if I go to a hockey game, for instance, and I see two athletes battling for the puck in the corner and one comes out with a puck. I look at it like this. Which one was it a physical win? Was it a technical win? Or was it a tactical win? Right. And so what needs to happen is that we start there, but within the athlete, and this is where I do a lot of my work, is that we have these layers that wrap around the athlete like a bubble, okay? Like a bubble. And so here's what happens, is that the first layer is resources, okay? So what resources have been applied or will be applied to this athlete, right? And resources usually boil down to this: time, energy, and money. Those are the big three. Okay, time, energy, and money. Everything else usually falls within those three categories: time, energy, and money. Those are your resources. So an athlete who has more resources may have more ability to work on these things, but that's not always the case. And I don't want that to be an excuse for you, right? This is a huge misunderstanding. People think like, oh, well, that athlete over there, their dad is, owns this company and he's got all sorts of money and he's going, no, I've seen it work. Like, it doesn't work that way. I've worked with parents who have like been city bus drivers, and I've worked with parents who are billionaires, and we all know that there's nothing wrong with being a billionaire. So there's nothing, we don't want to hold anything against those people. Like it's a crutch to bear, right? It's it can be a challenge, right? So I want everybody to understand that. So I don't want this to be an excuse for you. Your resources are what they are, right? And they are what they are. And so you apply the best with what you know and what you have, and then you get creative with the rest. That's it. Okay. Because I can find you a story somewhere of somebody who's done more with less. And that's what you got to tell your athlete. Okay. So, resources is the first layer. The second layer is life skills, right? You can have all the resources, right? But if your kid's showing up late and, resources, just so you know, this is kind of cool. When the World Health Organization isn't issuing decrees on coronavirus, they also issue decrees on life skills. So here's the World Health Organization's list of life skills. So we got communication and interpersonal skills, okay? So we've got decision-making and problem-solving. Those are other life skills. Creative thinking and critical thinking, okay? Self-awareness and empathy. This is a big one, right? This is where I do a lot of my work. Assertiveness and equanimity and or self-control, okay? Resilience and the ability to cope with problems, okay? And my favorite, the willingness to learn and apply what you've learned, okay? So now, for all the parents listening to me right now, don't click away. All right. don't throw your smoothie at the screen. But life skills is usually where we see all of your bad parenting, be totally honest. Okay. It's where we see the shortcomings of what kids have been brought up with. It usually comes down to life skills. Okay. And so I don't want anybody to take offense to that, but just be aware that that's part of it, right? So that's the second layer. First layer, resources. Second layer, life skills. Ironically, the first layer of resources are usually provided by parents, time, energy, and money. And then the second layer, life skills, are usually the ones that hold them back. So I jest, not really, but anyway, the final layer, okay. The final layer, and this all is going to help your athletes strategize, is their belief in all of this. It's their belief in their abilities. It's their belief in their resources, and it's their belief in their life skills. And sometimes if they don't have self-awareness, they might not be aware of what's holding them back. So when you strategize for the future, okay, when you strategize for the future, you have to look at all this and go like, oh, wait a second. All right, and you got to take the emotion out of it, right? You got to take the emotion. There's no emotion in these decisions. It's like you were building a robot, right? That's really the attitude you have to take. And so it doesn't matter so you're looking at yourself, let's say you're the athlete and I'm Jonathan, and I'm trying to look at, okay, if Jonathan the athlete is going to succeed next season at a level better than he did this past season, what do we need to improve on? All right. Now, certain things like height, you can't, that's where you're just waiting for Mother Nature, right? You're waiting for Mother Nature to help along that. You can't do anything there. I get it. But pretty much everywhere else, you can take ownership and decide, okay, what are we going to do with the resources that we have to make these improvements? Okay. And this is where you can rate your athlete. You can do all sorts of things. You can do like bar graphs and numbers. And I put my athletes through a whole process on these to really understand to get tough and understand like, what do we need to do to make this work, right? Because you don't want to live in a cloud, right? You don't want to live in a cloud of like hope and, oh, I hope this works out. Sometimes you have to completely reinvent yourself, and that's really hard, but it's possible. Right? I have an athlete I worked with this last year who really needed to just reinvent the way he thought about himself as a competitor, as an athlete. Technically, this kid was amazing, right? It was 99th percentile, right? Technically, but really needed to kind of recreate himself as an athlete. And so what's interesting here for the parents who are involved is you've had 30, 40, 50, 60 years to be you. And if you haven't had a major reinvention, it's hard to get your athlete to portray that to your athlete. That's where a lot of families will like hire me or a guy like me to help with this. It's an outside voice that goes, all right, listen, it's like almost like having like an accountant do an audit. It's like, all right, this is what's got to happen, right? And give the guidance from there, because the strategy has to be, again, without emotion. And then you have to look at each one of these areas and go like, well, what can we work on realistically? Where are we gonna have the biggest bang for the buck? And also sometimes these decisions are short term, right? Sometimes you may have 3 months, you might have 90 days, 120 days. Like for my winter sport athletes, what's kind of interesting about this is that they have to take a break. But for like my hockey athletes, for instance, or my soccer players, they can play year round. There's always like this other team that's available like in 3 weeks or 6 weeks or whatever. And that's never enough time to really make an impact. And it's also never enough time for an athlete to stand back and go, all right, who am I really? Like, who am I showing up as? How can I improve this? What can I do? And then what kind of time do I need to improve it? Because every strength and conditioning coach will tell you that, we need some time here to make an improvement. We need some time because you're either training and recovering or competing and recovering. And so if there's not enough time for the body to recover, we can't really make a big of an impact physically. But let's say, it's an easier decision. Let's say you have a technical issue that, you need skis or a new sled or a new pair of ski boots or a new pair of skates. I had an athlete I worked with a number of years ago, was a speed skater, and was basically skating on secondhand skates. Right? This came down to a resources thing, but it also came down to an understanding of what needed to be valued. And the family in this case had been told by the coaches that this athlete was ready for a new pair of skates, and the parents wouldn't bite. They didn't believe it. And I told them, I was like, it seems to me that the investment to be made here is not on, and this athlete was going to go to Europe for a camp. It was not on go to Europe for the camp. It's to take that money and invest it technically in the equipment that's going to help your athlete get better. Now, I'm not one, by the way, like I am not one to like blame equipment for performance, but sometimes it's valid, right? Sometimes it's valid, but there's also a point where your equipment is like 95% there, right? So, fighting for that 5% there, if you're looking to allocate funds, might be better spent on something else that's going to improve you physically or tactically, right? It always floors me when families will spend money on camps or clinics, and they'll drop $700 for 3 days worth of training, but the athlete not really know what the athlete is going there to learn, right? Sometimes, and for a lot of young athletes or new athletes, sometimes just going and learning more is better, right? It's good if they're just brand new. But for a lot of athletes who have some time under their belt, they have some experience, that resource of money, time invested may be spent elsewhere. Sometimes the best investment you can make is doing nothing at all, right? And I always used to marvel at our European counterparts who would take off to like the south of France for 2 weeks, or they would come to Canada or the US, and then after the race was done, they would go drive like for a week and have vacation. And as North Americans, for my North American families, we're really kind of bad at it. But taking some time off can also be a really good a strategy to set yourself up, right? Another strategy that I wanted to talk about was surgery. Some athletes, we go through a season and we're beat up and we're banged up, and there's something that we're working around. And this is always fascinating to me. When athletes, as high-performing athletes, we get to this point where we are so good at what we do that we're really good at it injured. That always blows my mind, right? And you hear these stories like, oh, so-and-so is playing with a broken hand or a torn rotator cuff. I remember athletes I competed with who, in the sport of luge, who, were competing on bad shoulders. Okay. And one thing I want to talk about here before we go is for my athletes, for those of you who have athletes who have to do some sort of team, like physical testing, I want to talk about that for a second. But surgery is an interesting concept because there are times when, as your season is coming to a close, it's better off cutting the season short and having surgery now as a strategy to be prepared for next season, right? Sometimes cutting your losses is important. I have an athlete currently who's dealing with a concussion. Now, my recommendation, I didn't know all the parts and pieces here, but my recommendation was to maybe cut the season short and go not have any sort of relapse of concussion, but be able to go into the summer fully brain healthy and ready to go to train, because this athlete needs to improve their physical ability before next season, right? Which is in September. But tactically, this athlete leaving the team at this point of the year would be perceived, unfortunately, incorrectly. And so this is where you have to weigh a tactical decision versus a technical physical improvement decision. And sometimes you have to do that. Okay. So surgery is always, I recommend a book on surgery by a guy named Dr. John Sarno, who passed away a few years ago. The book is called Healing Back Pain. I don't care if you have back pain or not. Read the book. It's going to give you an interesting take on surgery in general, but it's a phenomenal book. All his books on surgery and the Healing Back Pain book is fantastic. I recommend it to everybody. So, last topic for today is when athletically you're training for physical testing. Now, physical testing was always, when I was competing in the sport of luge, was always a bit contentious because you had athletes who were some of the best in the world, pushing the envelope, being the best in the world results-wise. But then you also had athletes on this team who were technically really good, but physically needed a kick in the ass. And what ended up happening as a team was physical testing was put in place so that we were shooting for these standards. And I think at one point in time, our funding was also tied to our physical condition going into the season, which is weird. But in a sport like luge, you can have athletes who are somewhat out of shape, but who can go real fast. So the concept, though, that I wanted to talk about, though, is training for physical testing versus training for your sport, because sometimes they're not the same. All right. The NFL Combine just happened, and there's been a lot of discussion over the years, and it was really heated this year about how the tests that the athletes do at the Combine don't really apply to the modern game of football. I remember when we were doing luge, when I was competing in luge, we had a pull-up test, and training for that pull-up test left me with bad shoulders my entire life. Right, I still have it today. And so this is where, if you're training for the test, you are wasting time potentially training to improve sport specifically. Okay. So for example, let's say an athlete has knee trouble, but has to do a vertical jump test or a horizontal, like a vertical leap test. An athlete who has knee problems shouldn't be probably compressing like that, right? Are there other ways to train an athlete? Yes. But sometimes you're tied in a position where you have to do the physical testing, and it's tied to making the team. Unfortunately, I don't have an easy answer for you on this one. I wish I did. I will blanket statement this: I don't typically like physical testing. Like for us, the physical testing was how many pull-ups could you do in 10 seconds? And I think I got to like 14. Right, but I spent so much time fighting for that test that it really impacted my shoulders long term. Were there other things I could have been doing? 100%. But that test was like, oh well, we should be doing this test because it's a good standard for the start. And I don't know anymore. For some of my luge families, you would know better than me at this point. But causation, correlation. I do remember that the U.S. national canoe kayak team would come to Lake Placid every summer before the summer games, and they would come out and do starts just for fun. These guys could do like sets of 20 with 45 pounds between their legs of chin-ups, pull-ups and stuff, and then they could go do a start and pull a really good start. Could they slide? No. But they had a pretty fast start. So it was this little trade-off there, which was kind of weird. So what I want, in the work that I do now, in kind of this mental conditioning, this mental performance, I look at all these facets with an athlete, right? When I was just a strength and conditioning coach, it was always interesting because I would work with all these athletes who were getting strong for the summer, but I realized that mentally they weren't prepared, right? They had issues understanding their belief in themselves and their belief in their performance and things like that. And so, now I look at this holistically and know that you can have an athlete who's really phenomenal physically, but isn't mentally prepared to perform. And then they just, all this time and energy and money, all the resources spent on getting them better physically, and ended up being wasted. So what I tell people now is like the money they invest in someone like myself makes the money they invest in everything else much more valuable, right? It's like an insurance policy on making all that stuff work. And a lot of times athletes will say like, oh, I wish I'd done this sooner to understand. And that's kind of where I come in. What I want you to do, no matter where you are, if you're in the middle of your season right now, and you can start strategizing for next season, right? You can start looking at like, okay, what are my shortcomings? I know for a lot of my luge athletes, it starts, right? For a lot of my bobsled athletes, it starts. For athletes in other sports, sometimes it's either gaining weight or losing weight. And a lot of people think it's kind of funny, like you have to gain weight, right? But some sports you need that. But looking critically at the whole package, and it doesn't matter to me if your kid, like I said, if your kid's U6, 6 years old and under, you can start strategizing now. And you can start weight training at 12 or 14 or things along those lines. But it's just having a sense of like, what do we need to do with my athlete bot? Like, again, right? If you're the athlete robot, what would you do to make you better? Like, look, what parts and pieces would you add, right? What would you be doing, right? Take the emotion out of it and look at it and go, all right, what do I need to do to reinvent myself? And then as a parent, you may have to look at yourself and go, what do I need to reinvent about my thinking to help my athlete gain the success that they really want to have and that you as the parent really want for them, okay? All right, so if you need any clarification on this, you can always email me, coachedwards@athletespecific.com. Got a lot of tons of resources on the website. Great stuff happening. Listen, wash your hands, fist bump if you need to. Don't overthink this whole coronavirus thing. I believe people will wish themselves sick. They'll believe themselves sick. That's going to happen. So take care, be careful, don't panic, right? But just know that this too shall pass. And you probably all have enough toilet paper to last for months. But if you enjoyed this, if you got a topic you want me to cover, you can email me or private message me here as well on Facebook. Make sure you're subscribed to go get the automatic negative thought downloads off my website at Athlete Specific. And you'll be on my newsletter as well there. If you don't have a copy of my book, it's on Amazon, An Athlete's Guide to Winning in Sports and Life. Check that out. I'm working on the audio book actually as we speak. But I'd love to hear from you. Love to hear about your athlete, how they're doing, and what their goals are, right? And just be free. Feel free to share with me. I like to say this. I'm a fan of your athlete, right? For all the parents listening to me right now, I know you're a fan, but like I'm a fan of your athlete. And it doesn't matter what the sport to me anymore. I've worked with athletes across so many sports now. I just love the process. And I love the fact that that sport is going to give your athlete really all the mental tools. If they do this right, all right, all the mental tools to overcome anything else, any other challenge they have in their life, any other time. So I really want the best for your athlete too. So if I can help you, I'm here. So thanks for watching, everybody. Please share this with somebody who needs to hear it, another parent, coach, another athlete. And by all means, I look forward to seeing you guys next week, unless it's snowing and a powder day, and then I might go skiing. But all right, everybody, take care. Bye now.